day everyone, this is Sir Jet and I welcome you to another episode of The Contemporary World. Today, our lesson is about political globalization. This is one of the major highlights of this course. What we will do is I will walk you through world history and we will see how political systems and political ideologies transformed the global landscape from the beginning of time up to the present. Now this is a very long lecture, so what we will do is we will divide the long lesson into 4 parts. So this is part 1. And we will cover the time when patriarchy was the political system in the world and how it led to the monarchy. Part 2 will be next meeting. We will talk about the monarchy to the rise of democracy and communism. Part 3, you will see there how democracy, communism, and fascism became rivals in the world. And in our 4th and last episode for this lesson, we will talk about the current situation, the post-war world. Now, this is where our previous lesson about forms of government will come in handy. That's why we discussed those concepts about nation and state, because today we will start seeing everything, or we will start using those terms. So let's begin with part 1, from patriarchy to monarchy. Alright, so this is the story of how the nomadic societies evolved into city-states, kingdoms, and empires. Let us start with the primitive times. Okay, this is the time when human beings look like this. Okay, they live in caves. They wore clothes like that. They have gadgets like a bow and arrow and spear. They don't have houses, and their neighbor is Tarzan and Flintstones. This is called the primitive times. Now, the people then were nomadic. When we say nomadic, that means they were roaming the face of the earth, trying to look for food every day. They are not settled in a certain place or city, because food will run out in that place, and when that happens, they need to move out, find another mountain or another place where they can find their food. And they are in small groups of families or clans. Now, how do they get their food? They get their food by hunting and gathering. Hunting means they have a bow and arrow, and they will shoot at some animals they see in the jungle, like a pig or a deer, and they will butcher it and eat it together as a family. While gathering means they pick up fruits along the way. They pass by a banana tree, and then they gather or they pick up the banana fruit, and they have a meal for the day. So that's how they lived in the primitive times. Now, they don't have a political system yet. Although they have decisions to make, they do the decision making by clan or by family, and usually the head of that group is the oldest male, and that's the head of the clan. So they don't have a president or a king, but they have the head of the family, who is called the patriarch. So this system is called patriarchy. It's very informal. Decisions are just simple, like there's no more food in this place. Where do we go? Left, right, forward? And then the patriarch will say this way. Okay, so that's the initial setup of human beings politically. Now, later on, the nomadic groups evolved into agricultural societies. Okay? So, they discovered something that changed their lives, and that's called agriculture. People learned how to plant crops and take care of animals. That is called the agricultural revolution. When we say agriculture, it means planting crops and taking care of animals. So the nomadic people learned on their own that they really don't need to butcher the animals in the jungle. They they don't need to shoot an arrow or a spear through the the pig or the cow and eat it. They have a meal for the day. Tomorrow they go hungry. But they discovered that they just need to capture the animal. No need to kill, but just capture the animal. Take care of it and mate the animal with a male or a female partner. Okay, so you capture a male pig. Tomorrow you capture a female pig, and then you mate the male pig and the female pig, and then you will have baby pigs. And you just take care of the baby pigs, and after some time you have lots and lots of food in your backyard. And that's called domestication of animals. And that's a very big discovery for the human beings at that time. Same way, the crops or the fruits that they gather need not to be wasted away for nothing. So after eating, they discovered that the seed can be planted. The seed of the fruits can be put in the ground and take good care of, and it will bear more fruits, more food supply for the whole family. And so agriculture was discovered. That's the agricultural revolution. And they started to settle beside rivers. Why? Because that's the best place to practice agriculture, beside the river, because you have a steady supply of water, not only for yourself, your family, but also for your animals and your crops. So in the nomadic setup, the people travel, they walk from one place to another. This time in the era of agriculture, they settle. They stopped being nomadic. They built houses beside their pig pen, beside their farm, and they get water nearby to irrigate their farms and to give water to their animals. So the best place would be the river valleys like Mesopotamia, Nile, Indus, and Wangho. And these are the said to be the original places where civilization sprouted. Mesopotamia is in present-day Iraq. The Nile River is in present-day Egypt. The Indus River is in present-day Pakistan. And the Wangho River is in present-day China. And so people started to flock to those places and build permanent settlements. So now you have lots of people, and they are not necessarily families or related to one another, but you have a neighborhood of people who are not relatives. They just gather together in that place to build their own city, because that's where they have their houses, their flocks, and farms. All right, so now you have cities or civilizations beside the great rivers. Now, these cities beside the great rivers evolved into states. We call city-states. Okay, and then later on, the city-states evolved into a larger form called kingdoms. And then the kingdoms evolved into empires. And this is what we call the ancient times. So we now transition from the primitive period to the ancient period in world history. Now, when you say city-state, okay, we will go back to the lesson about the four elements of the state. You have a city, and the city has the four elements of the state. So the city itself is already a state. That's why we call it city-state. Okay? So they are usually governed by a powerful person whom the people acknowledge as their political leader. Okay, so you have a city, there are people there, that's the first element of the state. They have a territory, that's the city itself. Number three, they have a government. They now have a person, a powerful person governing them. So we now have a form of government. And number four element of the state is sovereignty. The city-state is independent. It's not being controlled by another city-state, but itself is already, in itself, it's already independent. Now, how do the people select or selected their powerful person or leader in the city-state? Okay, they selected that leader, and they call him a man of war. They need somebody who would protect them from raiders. Okay, because during that time there were some bullies who just raid a certain city. They are armed, they get the harvest, they get the animals, sometimes the wives and the children, and also the treasure of the people living in the city. And they go away. Okay, it's called plunder. Okay, they go away with the plunder, and so the people living in the city are helpless. So they found a need to protect themselves, and there would be the strongest among themselves, usually the hunkiest, the biggest, the most skilled in a war guy that they put above them, and they would rely on that man to lead other hunky men in the city when the raiders would come again. So this man of war became the leader of the city-state. So now we have a sort of government in that community. All right? So the city-state later evolved into a kingdom because the strong man of war started to become or to be called a king. Okay? Why? Because there rose some social classes. The family of the strong man of war became the privileged family. They are a separate or a different, a higher family compared to the other families in the community or in the city-state. The strong man of war would have sons. He would have also cousins and brothers and sisters. He had his parents. And when he dies, okay, maybe because of old age, the next man of war or the next leader would be his eldest son. And that son would grow up, and when he dies, the next leader would be his son. So it comes from the family or the bloodline of the original leader or man of war or the strong man in the city-state. And so the uncles, the cousins, the relatives of that high-class family became the elite of their society. So now we have formation of social classes. The other families who are not related to the leader, they are the middle class. Okay? And then of course they have their servants or slaves. Okay, that probably they got it from the raiders that got captured. So now you have slaves or servants, you have the middle class, and the elite or the royal class. And so that family, the leader's family, the top class, became the nobility. The next leaders would come from that line. And so we have a monarchy. Okay? And for the first time, okay, we now have kings. They evolved from the strong man of war into kings. All right. And that's also the time when taxation was implemented, because the king would need resources to maintain his kingly status. Okay, he also needed wealth to maintain the army, okay, wealth to eat his royal food and build his royal palace and have his royal clothes, and everything royal is expensive. So where will he get all those wealth? From the taxes of the people. So that is now the setup in the city-states. We now call them kingdoms. It's no longer a city-state but a kingdom, because they now have a king. Now the kingdoms evolved into empires, because kingdoms invaded other kingdoms. We have one kingdom here, and then he wanted to conquer the neighboring kingdom. He did so, and on and on until he invaded several kingdoms, and now we have an empire. And the king who conquered the other kings is now called an emperor. Okay, he's like the king of kings, because he is the king of all the other kings he conquered. Now the other kings that he conquered are technically called vassal kings. Okay, so sometimes he would not kill the conquered king, but he would just ask those kings to collect taxes among their people, and the taxes would go to the emperor. Or sometimes the emperor would take away the vassal king and replace him with a governor, okay, coming from his own people. And same thing, the governor's job is to collect taxes from the conquered people. So that's how empires operated. Examples of ancient empires in the Middle East, we have the Babylonian Empire. Okay, you can read that in history books, also in the Bible. You know, Nebuchadnezzar. Okay, so he had a big empire in Babylon, and then it was conquered and replaced by the Persian Empire. And then these Middle Eastern empires were overrun by empires coming from Europe, like the Greek Empire of Alexander the Great. And his empire was divided when he died, and then it was replaced by the Roman Empire, which had a very, very vast territory covering from Europe to Asia to North Africa. And this is the time of Jesus. The Roman soldiers crucified Jesus. So this is the Roman Empire at its peak. Now, in elsewhere in Asia, there is also a big empire in Central Asia called the Mongol Empire. Okay, and their emperors were Kublai Khan, okay, Genghis Khan, and it's a large empire extending from East Asia all the way to Europe, to Hungary. Okay, so it's a very large empire, one of the largest ever in the history of the world. Now, in our own backyard, in the Southeast Asia, we also have empires here, like the Khmer Empire. Okay, so it's pronounced as Khmer, not Khmer. And it's based in Cambodia. These are the ruins of the Khmer Empire. It's a tourist attraction today. The Srivijaya Empire in present-day Indonesia. You read that in Philippine history. And in the other continents, we have empires also. In North America and South America, we have the Maya Empire and the Aztec Empire in Mexico. And these are samples of their art. And we have the Inca Empire over here in Peru. Okay, that's their lost city called the Machu Picchu. So all over the world, there were empires. Okay, so some of the empires may have contact with other empires, but some are just existing in their own corner of the world. And that's the setup that happened. Now, those empires in the ancient times, some of them fell, some of them continued on into the Middle Ages. Okay, so examples of empires in the Middle East during the Middle Ages is the Islamic Empire founded by Muhammad. Okay, and in Europe we have the Byzantine Empire under Constantine, and the base is Constantinople, and the Holy Roman Empire, which is in Central Europe. And that's the time of Shrek, knights in shining armor, kings in palaces. Okay, and these are empires that happened during the Middle Ages. All right. Now, it was also during the Middle Ages when these empires started to enter a new age called the Age of Mercantilism. Okay, so this is the picture of the Middle Ages. There are castles, and there are some peasants, ordinary people living outside the castle. And inside the castle they have the emperor or the king. Okay, there are ogres in the jungle. No, just kidding. Anyway, so this is the setup of the Middle Ages. And what is mercantilism? Mercantilism is the time when these empires in Europe started looking for gold and spices because number one, gold would be their measure of strength. The more gold an empire has, the more powerful that empire would be. So the emperors were crazy on how to accumulate as much gold as possible. So they tried to conquer other kingdoms and get the treasures of gold of that conquered kingdom into the depository of the emperor. Or they would look for places where they can get gold, like in Asia. Secondly, they are also looking for spices because during that time there's no electricity yet in the world, so they need to preserve the meat. Okay, you butcher a cow and tomorrow the meat will be rotten, so you need something to preserve the meat, and spices would be perfect in that time as a food preservative. But the trouble is spices don't grow in Europe, so they need to get the spices from Asia. And if a kingdom has some more supply of spices, the better. He is said to be more powerful than the other empires who have lesser supply of spices. And so that is the competition. Empires try to accumulate gold and spices. And in doing so, they were able to explore the world and discover new lands, new continents. And they built overseas empires out of the new lands that they discovered. Okay, so that's a picture of Christopher Columbus. And he discovered North and South America. And so the empires that they serve in Europe started to make their own expeditions and grabbing colonies or grabbing territories to turn into colonies here and there. Okay, and we belong in the story, like the Spanish Empire. Magellan, so he traveled the world and discovered the Philippines, okay? And we became part of the Spanish Empire. And its rival, the Portuguese Empire, also had a vast territory. Okay, places here in Southeast Asia were under the Portuguese. The Dutch Empire, present-day Indonesia is a Dutch colony, okay, or Dutch territory. And just like the Portuguese and the Spanish rivals, they were also after the gold and spices. You can read in Philippine history that in our place here, especially in the Philippines, gold is so abundant that the Spaniards can just pick up pieces of gold the size of an egg on the road or on the soil. And so they really wanted to colonize us because of our riches. The French Empire later on had their own empire also, and the British Empire is the largest empire ever. And the territory of the British included the United States of America, India, Australia, and places in China. And there are also some smaller empires like the Belgian Empire. It has a territory in Central Africa. So, as you can see, these are all European empires. And they have empires or territories in the other continents. So, the age of mercantilism, monarchy continued to be the political order. The empires were under a monarch, the emperor, and they ruled from motherland Europe. But their territories, their empire, extended to the other continents. So we have seen the growth of kingdoms into empires, into mega empires. Empires that would have an emperor lording it over from his throne in Europe to places that he conquered or his empire has in the other continents. So we now have a new world order. Okay, when you say world order, it means arrangement of countries. Okay, order like you have your sala. What's the order in your sala? The TV goes here, the sofa is over here, the coffee table is over here. So the world also had an order during that time. And what is this order? Europe is the seat of power. Okay, that is where the most powerful person is located. And the other continents would be the periphery. The subdued people. They are the people in Asia, Africa, and Americas. And for the British, they have Australia as their penal colony. The criminals in England were thrown away to Australia. And they don't want the criminals to be in the jails in England, so they throw them to a very, very far away place so that they would not cause trouble in England. And that is the new world order. Europe is the seat of power, and the other continents are the periphery. Okay, so that ends part 1 of our discussion today. Now let me summarize. Okay, let me summarize what have we covered so far. Okay, we are trying to see the political landscape of the world. Okay, from the beginning of time, we began with the nomadic people having patriarchy as their system. They discovered agriculture. They started to live in cities, and they evolved into a city-state. Okay, and the city-state became a formal kingdom when the strong man of war became a king. And then the king invaded neighboring kingdoms. Now we have an empire. And then the empires evolved into mega empires because they started colonizing or conquering places in other continents. So that's where we will stop for this episode. We will continue the story in our part 2 of political globalization. Again, this is Sir Jet, and thank you for joining me. I'll see you next time.